You're listening to The First Question with Paul Hendrick, brought to you by Biliztik Sports. Follow Biliztik Sports on Twitter @Biliztik Sports. Bob McKenzie's career in journalism is in its fifth decade. It all began in Sault Ste. Marie covering the Greyhounds with the Sault Star in the late 70s. It's included stops with the Globe and Mail, the Hockey News, and the Toronto Star before joining TSN 2 decades ago. Jim Lang is a veteran broadcaster whose career has included play-by-play duties for the Toronto Argonauts, CIAU Athletics, the Fan 590 Morning Show, Rogers Sportsnet, and currently is host of the Jim Lang Morning Show on CFMS FM. Jim and Bob have united for a second time in writing Everyday Hockey Heroes, Volume 2, after their initial release of Volume 1 in 2018. Gentlemen, right from the get-go in your latest book, we're made to understand that hockey heroes aren't just those wearing an NHL uniform. And Bob, I think it's your belief that the game's impact goes well beyond the 700 athletes that play in the National Hockey League, and I think this book illustrates that.
Well, thanks, Henny. I think you're right. I think Jim and I are both on the same page when it comes to that. I was a little later to the party than Jimmy on the whole Everyday Hockey Heroes franchise, if you want to call it that. Jim had already started work on the very first volume, along with Sarah St. Pierre, our editor at Simon & Schuster. And Simon & Schuster came to me and said, would you like to be involved? And they showed me a couple of sample checks. It was actually about 3 years ago now. So they came to me and they said, it was Kevin Hansen from Simon & Schuster and Sarah St. Pierre. And they said, we're doing this book project and Jim's spearheading it right now. Would you like to come in on it? And they showed me a couple of sample chapters, and one was on Wayne Simmonds growing up in Scarborough with some economic hardship and obviously some racial issues, but still made it to the National Hockey League and then gives back to his community in the off season for kids like himself that didn't have a lot of money growing up and maybe weren't given every opportunity to succeed, but he still found a way. And another one on Wayne blind when he was, I think, 18 or 19 years old in Windsor, Ontario, and is a lot older than that now, but he founded and coached and played with a team called the Toronto Ice Owls. And so those were, to your point, Henny, the opposite ends of the spectrum. Wayne Simmonds, everybody knows him. He's a National Hockey League player. Nobody knew who Wayne St. Dennis is, but his story was really inspiring too. So these were two great stories. And as soon as I read them, I thought, wow, this is really cool. So I jumped at the opportunity to get involved with it. And here we are now, got the second one out, and I've already started making notes in case there's going to be a number 3.
I think there will be a number 3 because the hockey heroes are so many. Jim, you start with Bob's hometown of Scarborough. I couldn't believe the number of black athletes who graduated from the programs there into the National Hockey League. I never gave it any thought till I read the book. But it's interesting to bring in the era of when Bob grew up in Scarborough, the hockey that was going on, his white privilege, opposed to some of the black athletes who were playing in minor hockey back then. And you bring to mind two guys, Lynn Gonzalez and Terry Mercury. And Terry, I know well, he was just two seats over from me in the Maple Leaf press box, but how their experiences, both gratifying in terms of hockey, but really much different given the color of Bob's skin and color of their skin.
Well, that's all Bob, and I give Bob credit for that. Bob decided that he wanted to track down these two gentlemen that he knew growing up in Scarborough. And Scarborough of the 60s and 70s, as Bob so eloquently explains, was so different than it is now. And it's almost a little bit of a Toronto/Canadian history lesson of how we've changed as a country. And you can't really understand the change of hockey without understanding the change of Canada. My grandfather immigrated from Europe. My in-laws immigrated from Europe. But immigration and the dynamics and the demographics of Canada is far different now than it was in the 60s and 70s. And Bob lived it firsthand.
Bob, you've talked about white privilege. You did have white privilege, but it comes with a caveat as well. I've known you for a long time, since 1979. I didn't know about your mom's struggles with rheumatoid arthritis and the problems and the challenges that confronted you as an only child, and your dad having to make ends work to keep you involved in hockey and you just keeping your head held high. So there was white privilege, but there wasn't a lot of privilege along the way as well.
Well, I think one of the things when we talk about white privilege, for some reason, it's become a negative connotation, and it shouldn't be, because it's really just an observation. Mm-hmm. And that is That is because, you know, I grew up in a primarily white society and got involved in a primarily white game. And so that's not to say that there weren't hurdles that I had to overcome or there weren't things that were, you know, I didn't lead a privileged life, but white privilege exists to the extent that as a white person in a primarily white game, I never had a roadblock thrown my way simply because of the color of my skin or because of my sexual orientation or, you know, whatever. And so what we've come to realize, and whether it was Terry Mercury or Lindbergh Gonzalez or, you know, a gay person by the name of Joey Gale that's featured in the book, or Jessica Platt, who's transgender, what you have to realize is that, you know, my life in the narrow focus of being involved in the hockey mainstream was a lot easier than a lot of these other people because they were part of a demographic that was quote unquote different. And I wasn't different. And as you point out, Henny, and I made the distinction in the book, I never felt like as a kid growing up in Scarborough, which is was always a blue collar place. You know, everybody's parents, both parents had to work, and my mom ended up in a wheelchair because of rheumatoid arthritis and died in her 50s as a result of complications from it. That wasn't privileged, but in the narrow focus of growing up in the hockey world, I never had a setback or anything simply because of who I was.
You mentioned some athletes. I don't know if there's a story, Jim, that stands out to you. I'm not going to put you on the spot that way because this is a work of passion. I'll tell you what stood out for me in reading it. It brought a tear to my book, and that was Minnesota native Jack Jablonski, and in a wheelchair and in an accident. And I just think of Travis Roy, who recently passed away last month, the result of being rendered a quadriplegic hockey accident. Maybe we can talk about Jack's story and his perseverance and the ability to come as far as he did after that accident that rendered him into a wheelchair at the age of 16.
And I've been part of 6 books, and without question, that's the hardest thing I've ever done is work in Jack Jablonski's chapter. Yeah. Because he's about the age of my youngest daughter, who used to be in gymnastics. And I remember it while we were putting the chapter together, a couple of years earlier, Cassandra was at a meet, and one of the girls was doing a dismount from a balance beam and misjudged and hit her shoulder. And my wife and I, she kind of grabbed my hand, and we both got that sick feeling because we realized a couple inches over, she could have snapped her neck. And when you play sports and you're a kid and your body's still developing, you just don't know. And it's not just hockey, it's any sport. And Jack was the quintessential prep high school player in Minnesota. And as you both know, Minnesota high school hockey is the be all and end all. To play prep high school hockey in Minnesota is a big deal. And in his words, Jack was looking ahead to NCAA hockey, the NHL. Hockey was his life 24/7. And the hardest thing, I mean, about the whole story is, and he had difficulty getting the words out, is explaining that as the paramedics wheeled him off the ice, he realized that's the last time I'll be on the ice as a hockey player. And he's 16. And for most people, it's the physical, emotional, mental avalanche that just descended upon you in that moment is so overwhelming. But then to graduate high school on time, which is a goal, go to USC and graduate with honors, to get a job with the LA Kings and their social media department, and then raise all the money and awareness that he does. I just love the kid. And I mean, you're putting the story together, and it is emotional. Like, I don't know how you can't be inspired by someone like Jack.
I'll tell you where I teared up is after they won the sectional championship to get to the state tournament. And Bob, it's being wheeled out onto the ice in his wheelchair. And there's 8,000 fans screaming jabber, jabber, jabber. And just, I think from a mom and dad's perspective, his perspective, he probably the greatest moment in his life as he was describing. But it tugs at all our heartstrings. You've got 2 boys, that I know playing hockey and broadcasting. Yeah. I mean, it just tugged in so many ways.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I knew after we did Everyday Hockey Heroes Volume 1, and we were going to do a Volume 2. When Jim and myself and Sarah sat down a year ago, August, I think it was, Jim came to the table with a whole bunch of names saying, I think these people need to be in the book. Sarah came with some ideas as to who she thought should be in the book, and I did the same. And Jack was one of those people that I knew as soon as we finished Volume 1 that he'd be really good, because I was just so impressed myself to have the capacity to suffer such a traumatic injury and just so drastically and dramatically alter your life, and yet still to graduate from USC and to be as mature and the presence that he created for himself on social media, and that indefatigable hope of I'm going to walk again. I know they tell me I'm not going to, but I am. And for him to take some of the physical steps that he did, and to have some feeling in his toes, and to get up and move his leg a little bit or whatever against all odds, it's really incredible.
And hired as a social coordinator, content coordinator and social media for the LA Kings, which, by the way, is one of the best social media sites in the National Hockey League. Bob, top of the show, you mentioned Jessica Platt, and Jim, we're going to talk about her and transgender hockey. And it's all about inclusivity, but so much conflict, so much challenge within these athletes, not only having to deal with what's happening within their bodies, but telling parents, telling friends, telling teammates. What a battler, what a scrapper Jessica Platt is.
I know Bob has mentioned it before in previous interviews, and I sort of echo his sentiment. It was an educational chapter. Mm-hmm. I remember Rod Brindamore, Bob and I, all three of us were at the Stanley Cup final with Carolina and Edmonton, and Rod Brindamore kind of saying, hey, you don't know what you don't know. And it's always stuck with me. And you kind of think, well, I know, I'm a dad, I'm an adult, I know everything. And then you read Jessica's chapter and you're like, I don't know anything. And it's so enlightening and so educational, and it hits you right between the eyes that, have I said stupid things? Have I acted in a stupid way in my life? And God, I hope I never do it again. And it's a hockey chapter, but it's also a life chapter that is hopefully enlightening to all of us who read it about there are people going through things that we need to give them the respect that they deserve and the support they deserve.
Yeah, interesting quote. I didn't belong in a men's locker room, but didn't feel comfortable in a women's room. And then they encouraged Bob to make the decision to proceed with hormone therapy, ultimately an operation. But the results were, if she didn't go that way, the other option was she wasn't going to be around.
Well, to add to what Jim said about the whole transgender thing, I mean, we're educated people. We're not overly smart, any of the three of us, but we're educated. And so I've been aware of transgender people for a long time, and I've thought, oh yeah, okay, I understand the concept. But to Jim's point, he mentioned like getting hit between the eyes. It's like a gut punch or right to the heart, just in terms of when you read Jessica Platt's story. And Jessica's story is amazing for another reason, because I wrote the introduction in the first chapter. Mm-hmm. Jim wrote pretty much most of the rest of the book, but Jessica wrote her own story. Isn't that right, Jimmy?
Yeah.
So Sarah, it was actually Sarah, when I talk about that collaborative process that went on a year ago, August, when we came, it was, I believe, Sarah who came and said Jessica Platt would be great to do her story, and we were going to reach out to her and see if she would. So she actually wrote this on her own with help, obviously, from Sarah, who helps Jim and I as well, because she's a great editor. But it's an amazingly well-written story that takes the whole range of emotions of a young child not feeling as though the child's trapped in a body that doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. And then the feeling of not being comfortable in the hockey culture because of, homophobic slurs and just overall toxicity, pushing that child away from the game. And then the child having to come to terms as the child gets older with, creating a new identity for herself, and going through, as you talked about, Henny, the surgery, the hormone therapy, mm-hmm. and and then being on the other side of it and thinking, okay, it's going to be good now, but then going back to hockey and still not being fully embraced because now you've got even a different title than you had before. And so, you know, the whole way she wove that story together, it hits you on a physical level, it hits you on an emotional level, it hits you on a mental level. And, you know, it's just the entire story is incredibly courageous. So that story had a huge impact on me when I read it. I was like, wow.
Let's go to another story of courage and perseverance, and it's Joey Hishon, Stratford, Ontario. I was in the building in Mississauga that night. I know, Bob, you were. Braden McNabb with the elbow. I know it's a product of hockey. It was a vicious, unwarranted hit, especially at that time in the game. And I know Braden and Kootenay were upset and whatnot, but it left me feeling bitter, even to this day, 9 years later. But we talk about, you know, Jack Jablonski, 16 years of age. Here's Joey on 18, expecting to get to the National Hockey League soon, Jim. And all of a sudden, his life's put on hold, as it turned out to, for the better part of the next 3 years.
You know, Henny, what fascinated me about Joey's story was the people behind the athletes, the importance of a mom, a girlfriend, a wife. If you are having tough times, how important they are in your life. And his girlfriend at the time, now wife, Dory, how she was his foundation when he could just sit in a dark room and do nothing for weeks on end. The only thing keeping him going was Dory. And then when he needed a little nudge out of the nest to try to see if he could come back, it was Dory who was there with him. And then what I didn't realize is that I know he had a long relationship with a childhood friend, Ryan O'Reilly, but Ryan O'Reilly's father, how crucial he was in rebuilding his mental strength and psyche and self-esteem as a hockey player after an injury like that. And then to go through everything and then to score a goal, the Avalanche, and a nice goal. And one of my favorite photos in the book is him skating back to the Avalanche bench and the look on the teammate's face. That gets me all the time. That's why hockey's so good. And there's Ryan O'Reilly, his childhood friend, and Jerome McGinley with a smile that big. And he can go to hockey DB until his dying days, and it'll be one NHL goal, Joey Hishon. And he did it. He came back from a horrible injury, and he scored that darn goal.
And it actually started a Colorado Avalanche tradition. I didn't fully realize this. And Jimmy, I think you wrote about it in the thing, but Gabriel Landeskog sprayed the water. And it's funny. I did with Ryan Boulding, I did Mile High Hockey podcast radio show in Denver, and they were talking about that. And now anytime anybody scores their first goal in the NHL on the Avalanche, Landeskog squirts the water bottle in their face. So, but the Joey one was another one that was near and dear to me too. And Jimmy did such a great job of working with Joey on that story. And so, you know, when Joey suffered that concussion at the time, it's amazing the evolution of how concussions have been treated, because back in the day, to Jimmy's point, relating Joey's story of just, you know, staying in a dark room for weeks on end because, you know, light, noise, all these things make you ultra sensitive. You've got a headache, you've got these symptoms, you just can't even venture out into the real world. It's just such a terrible, dark time for athletes that go through that, and not just for them, but for their families as well. But there started to be a bit of, while Joey was experiencing that problem, there started to be an evolution in how they were treated, and with Dr. Carrick in Florida and other people, some of the chiropractic and ART people. And so they started to realize that there were things you should be doing to keep the brain active, that you shouldn't be shutting it down in a dark room, that you need the vestibular awareness, and you need to move your eyes, and you need to do certain amounts of exercise that don't exacerbate your conditions too much, but start to retrain your brain not to feel injured. And it was actually, Joey was really frustrated, and he knew that I'd gone through a process with my sons, but one in particular with concussion problems. And so through his agent, who's a mutual friend of ours, Paul Capizano, Joey actually reached out to me and said, do you think there's anybody you could hook me up with? I've tried everything so far and it's not working. And I got him hooked up with Mark Lindsay, who's as good a chiropractic ART guy as there is in professional sports. And through Mark Lindsay and some other people, Joey started to get a lot of people that could really give him a hand and pave the way for him to come back and score that goal.
As Jerome Aginla described it, and Jim, you do so well in the book, you danced Shea Weber, you toe dragged Roman Yossi, and then you fired it by Pekka Rinne. Even Joey, he laughs about the memory and just what a good memory it was. And he's gone on to work in coaching and management, of course, with Dale DeGray's own Sound Hockey Club. And it's a good story. It's just a good story. Now, I'm not sure whether this next gentleman's going to get to the Hall of Fame, but he could get there for a variety of reasons. And Bob, it's Andrew Cogliano. And it goes back to your son Mike's days of playing with him in St. Mike. So there was a connection immediately. But what a story this is. And in terms of durability in this sport at this level, unheard of until George Parros nipped it in the bud almost 11 full seasons into a streak that went, I guess, 833 games.
Yeah, and you know what? The book is full of players and people that, for lack of a better term, we say are on the margins sometimes. Maybe somebody is Black and feels like they've been put on the margins, LGBTQ or whatever, you're on the margins and what have you. I still thought it was important that for as much as we want to have what I call new age hockey culture and representatives of it, we want to make sure that there's some traditional, old fashioned, hardcore hockey values that come with no negative connotations. Hard work, dedication, teamwork, sacrifice, commitment, family, all the right values. And so when I started thinking about who would exemplify that, I thought, who better than who would have been the reigning NHL Ironman by now, probably, if not for the suspension. And the fact that I knew Andrew Cogliano very well from, as you said, Henny, playing with my son Mike, played with him at St. Mike's. They played on the same line. I always joke with my son Mike, he played on a line with Andrew Cogliano and Matt Halishuk, of course, who went on to score the game-winning goal for Canada at the World Junior Championships and play in the National Hockey League with Winnipeg Jets. And I jokingly give Mike the business and say one of these things doesn't belong with the other. Playing on a line with Matt and Andrew, but he and I knew Andrew and how important his parents Carmen Teresa were and his brother Matt and what a strong family values they've got and just. And I think Jim did a great job of working with Andrew to capture, how many times he could have been sick or he could have been injured or, because to play that many games in a row consecutively in the NHL with all the travel and how physical it is and how many guys have damaged bodies and the number of times Andrew got his teeth knocked out and ended up with a piece of a tooth in his lip that was there for like a long time. He thought it was scar tissue and had to have it surgically removed. It's crazy, but we wanted to make sure we had some of those stories in the book as well.
What stood out for the Jim, in terms of the Cogliano story? Bob talks about the split lip with the broken tooth. I mean, there were sprained ankles. I'd forgotten he played his 1,000th game in Toronto last February. We were there, but I'd completely forgot about that significance, but it meant a lot to Andrew, especially as the way the schedule worked itself out before COVID, that he got a chance to do that right here at home.
The word that always comes to mind while I was talking to Andrew, putting the chapter together, is there's a sense of humility. And that sense of humility drives him every day. He never takes for granted that he's in the National Hockey League. So he approaches every day like his mom and dad approached every day going to work. He was raised in an Italian-Canadian family that you got up and you went to work. And if you wanted something in life, you worked for it. And still to this day, after all these years and all those games, he gets up and he prepares his body, eats the right food, makes sure he does the work. He says, look, these young guys are getting faster. Like, he's known for his skating, but he's like, I got to work on my skating more in the off season. You're like, you're kidding. It's that humility that it's a privilege every day you go to the rink playing in the National Hockey League that really struck home with me, that he appreciates it every day. He appreciates the friendships for life that he's made. He talks very lovingly about his friends as a rookie with the Oilers that will be his friends for life because of what they went through in their first year in the NHL and how important his family is. His family in Vaughan, his wife and daughter and their dogs. He's big into dog rescue, but And that's the one thing about Andrew, that's why he played so many games. He didn't think, oh, I'm just going to take a game off and just rest a bit. No, because to him it was like, I'm being paid and I'm going to be ready. I'm going to work. I'm going to play the game. And he did it. And you think about it, weeks become months and years, and you play all those games. And he did get a little, like, he's still a little emotional about the fact that the streak ended on a very marginal suspension from his former teammate, of all things. But the respect that around the NHL that people have for Andrew is very well deserved because of the kind of person he is and the way he's treated the game and still treats it to this day.
Now, those Oiler teammates, Sean Horkoff, Ethan Morrow, and Steve Staios, two of those three played 1,000+ games, the other 928. So he's in great company. Let's go to Beaverton, Ontario. And Bob, Jeremy Rupke, you talk about persevering through adversity, the trauma of a parental divorce, obviously, when he was just 7, and then a brain injury sustained in a bike accident, and how this young man stayed the course and through hockey was able to stay grounded, patient, worked hard, and has really made an impact on the game.
You know, it's interesting because Jeremy Rupke was somebody who I became aware of just a little bit because of his social media presence. Mm-hmm. And so I started seeing some of these tweets turning up from a guy named Coach Jeremy. Never heard of him before. Oh, Coach Jeremy, and interesting stuff. And what really caught my attention was he a couple of years ago he mic'd up his 4-year-old kid, mm-hmm. Mason, for a Timbits practice, and the thing went viral, and rightfully so, because if you go to YouTube and look for Coach Jeremy mic'd up Mason, it's 5 or 6 or 7 minutes of absolute hilarity. The kid's really cute, and he's got so many. He's calling people yellow paint can, and hey, Dad, are we gonna go to McDonald's after the game, and right. and stuff. So that was really funny. And then because I saw some of Jeremy's tweets and whatever, he's got a website, How To Hockey, and so you go to the website, and I started realizing, hey, here's a guy who isn't famous. He's not well known, but he's created this viral video with his son. And in the meantime, what an amazing website he's got here. There's tons of free content in terms of going on and learning how to take a shot, or learning how to skate, or how to do this, or technical stuff that if you were a young hockey player or somebody learning how to play the game, this would be an unbelievable wealth of information, and it's all just there, free for the taking. So I thought that'd be cool. So I mentioned it to Jim and Sarah when we had our meeting, and then Jim talked to him, and I knew nothing about the fact that the trials and tribulations of Jeremy's life growing up, and how he loved hockey, but he couldn't always play it because his parents had a pretty bad divorce early on. He spent some time living with his dad, some time living with his mom. There was some economic hardship there. They couldn't afford to put him in hockey at times. And then on top of that, he's riding his bike and he gets hit by a car and he ends up with traumatic brain injury, and he's in really bad shape. And when Jimmy wrote the story, so I went into it with an idea of, oh yeah, this is a really nice story of a guy that gives back to the community. And then I read the story about everything that went on in his personal life. I knew none of it, and Jim and Jeremy put this story together, and it's absolutely fantastic. And another one where I go, wow. I knew the story would be interesting, but I didn't think it would be this. And it was next level.
Jim, there's so many wows in this book. And I want to go to Danielle Sauvageau. And we did a podcast with Sammy Jo Small talking about her book, The Role I Played, and the heartbreak of being told the night before the semifinal against Sweden, not by Danielle, but by one of the assistant coaches, that she wouldn't be starting, that the decision, a hard decision, was to go with Kim St. Pierre. And it was a good decision. I mean, Canada won the gold medal. But you get an idea of just how tough a coach Danielle Sauvageau was, but she comes by it honestly. And you think back to Quebec in the early 70s, pretty tough if you want to play hockey and you're a woman, because there's just no place to play.
Well, Paul, I've always been fascinated by her. And, I always thought in 2002, when she won the gold medal in Salt Lake City, the kind of person it was to overcome, especially that gold medal game and all the penalties. And Bob alluded to the chapter with Jeremy. What I enjoy most about working with Bob and Sarah in books like this is the chance to tell stories. Yeah. I like the art of storytelling. I like knowing stories. And Quebec, as you say, and she grew up in suburban Montreal in the early mid-70s, is not exactly the most progressive place in the world or welcoming to women in hockey. And even as through the years, basically willing herself to be a coach in hockey, and that mental toughness, and be a police officer and do a drug bust at the same time, then coaching at night. There's a certain steeliness about her personality that allowed her to be that kind of coach and achieve at that level. And we watch Team Canada and see the women's team in 2020 and think they've always had everything. And you forget that in the lead up to the '02 Olympics, they really were not getting hugely funded or hugely supported. And it broke a lot of barriers having someone like Danielle really champion their cause, saying we deserve to be treated and get all the same support as all the men do in hockey in Canada. And it opened up a lot of doors to corporate sponsors and government sponsors to realize, yeah, you're right. Not only are they good, they just won the gold medal, and they're a big part of hockey in Canada. And I think she broke a lot of barriers. And one day we will have women coaching in the National Hockey League. I was just watching some of the football yesterday. There's women who are officiating in the NFL. I mean, I was watching it was the Browns and Eagles. There was a woman pulling players off the pile to see if there's a fumble. There's women in the NBA officiating. We're going to have women who are coaching in the NHL someday, managing in the NHL, officiating in the NHL. And a lot of that is because of the barriers that were shattered by people like Danielle Chauvageau in 2002, and what the legacy's left for women for years to come.
One of the legacies, I remember after that gold medal game, I'm throwing a football. It was a warm February day in Mississauga. And my daughter, Caroline, 8 years old, coming out and said, "Dad, I want to play hockey next year. I want to play hockey." And that was the inspiration and the legacy. The other thing, Bob, I remember in that game, and American referee Stacey Livingston assessing 13 penalties, 8 consecutively to Canada. But in behind the bench, I know if it would have been Terry Chris back in our days, Sue St. Marie or Pat Quinn, would not have been as calm. But I guess her police training really held her in good stead.
Yeah, that no doubt about it. And that Daniel's she's in the book because that was one of the ones that Jim brought to the table and said that this is somebody that we really need to have in here because she is blazing a trail. And what I found interesting too was, and it's true, because and what Jim said is absolutely correct. One day there will be a woman actually behind the bench in the National Hockey League, and they will owe a lot to a Danielle Chauvageau. But I also, everything she did to shatter glass ceilings or whatever, there was still a level of frustration, and you could sense it from her that she wasn't the one that got to coach in the National Hockey League. But it was still cool that Serge Savard reached out to bring her into the fold in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League and have a woman coaching guys in the QMJHL. And there's no reason women are not genetically predisposed to not be able to coach men's hockey. There's nothing whatsoever to prevent them from doing that, and it's only a matter of time until it happens.
Jim Bob mentioned Joey Gale at the top of the podcast. Let's go back to the state of Minnesota. Young man growing up and realizing there was some inner self-confusion as to how he should be compared to how his hockey teammates were, and realizing he was gay or is gay, and having to carry that secret, and what a burden it was. But hockey was solace for him on the ice. He was able to forget that for the time being. But the caveat there as well is the dressing room and the slurs and everything going on. But living, I hate to use the term living a lie, but having to live within himself and hide from what his true reality is.
I think for a lot of people that read Joey's story, and Joey, that was another one of those stories that Joey put together with Sarah St. Pierre. Living that lie, as you alluded to, Henny, is unfortunately for a lot of people what they go through in everyday walk of life, not just within an NHL dressing room, but maybe there's people in their work and their life and their career who don't feel living who they are because they feel it's going to hinder their advancement. And that's sad to think in 2020, but there are probably some people that think like that. And Joey is an extremely brave individual, but he's one of those people that you need to read his story. And it kind of ties into another chapter in the book about pride tape. And that's to me, the key story in his chapter is going into a dressing room with pride tape and a teammate saying, well, who's got the gay tape? And he's saying, well, I am, and basically, and they're like, oh, okay. Because people in the hockey dressing rooms, unfortunately, there's whatever filter you may have in life. For some reason, you go in a hockey dressing room, the filter's gone, and it's almost like being on the golf course. So you say and whatever comes to your mind without any thought of who else might be in there, what kind of things they're going through, and hopefully maybe people read Joey's chapter and understand what he went through. But words do matter sometimes, and how we speak does matter, and how we act in an NHL dressing room can matter as well. But Joey's he's the kind of person, I don't know how you can't read a story and feel good about him and cheer for him and want to be by his side and support the guy.
And I guess growing up,
I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. There's a common theme with some of these stories, and Joey's is one of them, where a person felt like they were being pushed away from the game that they loved because they were made to believe, or they sensed that they weren't being accepted for who they were, that they didn't belong. And you saw it with Joey Gale, you saw it with Jessica Platt. And yet, and Jim made the point, after Joey basically left hockey because he didn't feel comfortable in the culture and he thought there was too much homophobia going on, that after he went to university and he came out to his family and friends, and it was no longer a secret that he was gay, and he announced when he was playing in a men's league and he got picked to go to the All-Star game, and the story that Jim was alluding to, he decided that when he was going to this All-Star game that he wasn't going to be about shy of who he was, so he put the LGBTQ rainbow-colored pride tape on his stick. And as Jim said, someone says, "What's with the gay tape?" Well, that's mine. It's because I'm gay. And the nice part about this story is that this time he was warmly accepted. He was welcomed and he felt comfortable. So I think that also gives us a little bit of hope that the hockey culture changes, it evolves. And where Joey Gale didn't feel comfortable in his teenage years with the hockey culture, as he got older and felt more confident in his own ability to be who he was, he did feel comfortable in the hockey culture, and he was warmly welcomed. And that chapter that Jim did with Jeff McLeod and Dean Petruck, the founders of Pride Tape, that was for me one of the biggest revelations of the entire book. I had no idea. And when Jim and Sarah said we're doing a story on Pride Tape, I was like, okay, well, whatever. And then I read the story, and I was because of the way that it tied in with Joey, but for Jeff and Dean to tell this story, two straight white dudes, both in Edmonton, working for advertising marketing agencies there, and they saw a University of Alberta study that said during professional sports events on television, the number of homophobic slurs on social media increase exponentially, which shows there's a link between professional sporting events on TV and homophobic slurs. The two go together. They shouldn't, but they do. And so they decided they wanted to come up with something that might be a rallying point for the LGBTQ community. And they came up with the help of Billy Ranford and Andrew Ference, two former National Hockey League players, paving the way for them. They came up with this idea, and then to see the concept of Pride Tape over here, but then to see how much it meant to a guy like Joey Gale, I thought those two stories together were fantastic.
Couple of minutes left. I want to talk about pioneers of the sport. And again, it's gender inclusivity. I know my daughter, now a lawyer, grew up playing rep hockey. She's got goals that includes getting involved in the entertainment and sport business, including hockey as a possible agent. I didn't realize, and I said to her, I don't know of any female agents, maybe in the States, but not in Canada. I read your book and I find out there is Emil Castengay, and regardless of gender, I mean, this is a firecracker who is going to keep going no matter what. And a bright girl went to, I guess, Dartmouth to play hockey, and then law degree at the University of Montreal. Jim, It's about time, and I'm surprised we don't have more, but I think Emil's going to cast a long shadow that's going to open the way for many others to get into the sport, regardless of what gender they are, but especially women.
Well, Annie, she has got this iron will about her when it comes to life and hockey. Her work ethic, her determination, the will to succeed. And I like how she says that she's in a meeting. It's not male, female. There's no gender. It's do a deal, do the best deal possible. There's a reason why she's the player agent for Alexis Lafreniere. That's not because she's a woman. It's because she's good. And she's hockey 24/7, and she's paid her dues, and she works at it relentlessly. And she's one of these kind of people that sleeps 6-7 hours a night, maybe, and then up at the crack of dawn, and she's like studying while she's on the treadmill, and it's work, it's going to rinks, there's no half-ass attitude towards her career. She is all in at being a player agent. She wants to be one of the best and have an outstanding list of clients under her resume. And with that kind of attitude, she's going to do it. And there'll be more Alexis Lafreniere's in her career, the way she approaches it. She went in there, and she's, first of all, when you speak to her, you realize she is an extremely intelligent woman. And her IQ is off the charts, but also she has that hockey background. She can talk the hockey language to people. She can do business deals, and she has that's the kind of mentality it takes to be an agent. Bob's been around agents for years, and to just be an agent, everyone says, I'm going to be an agent. They have come and gone like you change socks, but to stick and to make it and to sign clients, there's only a select few to get to that level. I think that speaks volumes to her abilities, and that's the kind of person that other young women who have that sort of hockey academic dual background can look to her and say, well, if she can do it, maybe I can do it as well.
Bob, we'll conclude things with you. I'm just going to mention Tom Fatsis, longtime organizer with the Portrait Paperweight Hockey. We're going back 30-odd years. I put out so many players into the National Hockey League, but that's not the important. Max Domi, one of them as well, and Stanley Cup champions. But he's a hockey hero. He's an unsung hockey hero. My son went through the program. You guys talked about Volume 3. I'd have to think there might be a Volume 3, and maybe there has to be. I mean, you guys have got to do it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's up to Simon and Schuster. We'll see how Volume 2 sells. But I knew when Kevin Hansen and Sarah first came to me and pitched the idea, they did indicate, listen, if Volume 1 is well received, there'll be a Volume 2. And I've got to assume that a Volume 2 is well received, and it's off to a pretty good start here. It's on a lot of the bestseller lists and what have you. That there will be a Volume 3, and I'm sure Jim's the same as me, but I've already started jotting down names and ideas and some of the people who would populate Volume 3 if we get the green light to go ahead and do it. But in the meantime, we'll celebrate those that are in Volume 2 and continue to do our best to get those messages out there, because as the title suggests, more inspiring stories, and who doesn't like to be inspired?
Well, the game is hockey, and it's about total inclusivity. It's a game void of diversity based on race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, or physical limitations. And Unsung Hockey Heroes Volume 2 celebrates those who found their way in the sport despite all of those challenges. Jim, Bob, thanks so much for this.
Thanks, Henny. You're a good man.
Thanks, Henny.
You're listening to The First Question with Paul Hendrick, brought to you by Biliztik Sports. Follow Biliztik Sports on Twitter @Biliztik Sports.